Welcome back to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. We're back in the studio where technology maven Esther Dyson is calling to share her perspective on the contemplated surrender of the top internet governance organization to the UN, and also fill us in on her own project in healthcare. As an analyst, conference organizer, angel investor, philanthropist, and commentator, Esther's been a ubiquitous part of the digital revolution. Esther, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Esther, according to my Rolodex, it's actually been 22 years since we last chatted. It was in New York during the early days of the commercial internet. You've been involved, in internet governance ever since commercial traffic was first allowed on what used to be a government and academic network. But before you became the first chairwoman of the nonprofit that coordinates the internet's global domain name system, it was run by a long-haired, bearded, quirky computer scientist. Tell us a bit about Jon Postel and the role he played in the internet's early days.
Yeah, he was one of those people that wasn't elected or just happened to be sitting where it all converged. He was managing this little list, basically, of computers that were connected through the ARPANET. And each of them kind of had a numerical ID. If you wanted to write or send a text file or something to the people at such and such a research outfit, and you didn't know that number, you would type in a name. It would go to this little list that Jon Postel had, and it would get resolved, and it would get sent. So
he was the first directory assistant.
Yeah, in a sense. It was real time. He didn't sit there personally. It was a little list on a machine, but it was nothing. And the list grew longer and became more important. And originally, they contracted it out to a nice minority contractor as part of the way things are done. And then that minority...
Then who was they that contracted it out?
A bunch of guys either in the military or the research community. I'm sure somebody knows, but it wasn't seen as a big decision.
Under some research contract, they said, hey, take care of this directory assistance. It's getting too cumbersome.
Yeah, and then that company got acquired by Network Solutions, Inc., which later got acquired by SAIC. And from being just managed this list, it became a huge moneymaker because lots of people were using it. And eventually, they also made copies of it, mirrors. And this server that kind of held the golden jewels was called the root server. And in the end, it was a hierarchical system. There was this
layers,
and people would hold a subset. So .com and .org were run by NSI. I think the government kept .mil and .gov, and then there was .edu. But the one that, of course, was really big and growing was .com.
And that was when the internet was exploding. People were becoming a little bit uncomfortable with the lack of formal governance. And
precisely. Everything that I'm telling you is so vague and kind of casual.
Yeah, it made it up as it went along.
And they thought, geez, suppose something went wrong. And one day, in a fit of annoyance at something or other, John kind of moved things around so that everybody got sent to the wrong site.
That was quite an incident.
Yes. And so from my perspective, I kind of saw this happening. I had written a book about the internet and governance and all these kinds of things. And there were all these different factions. And commercial types.
There was a lot of tug-of-war going on. There were people who didn't even want commercial traffic on the internet. I remember Ralph Nader fighting tooth and nail to keep commercial traffic off the internet.
Yeah, which is dumb. It's been probably the best thing that's happened to democratization ever.
Eventually, along came ICANN, which was the Internet Corporation for Signed Names and Numbers. It was created by consensus. You were the first chairwoman.
Yeah. So again, it was a little more complicated. It was an immaculate conception. The idea was that this was a body that had been created pristinely by consensus of the broad internet community. And in practice, it was more or less created by the EU and the U.S. government with kind of a nod to Japan. And, of course, the commercial interests were saying, just leave this thing alone, it works fine.
Don't break
it. Governments outside the U.S. and Europe were saying, this is a U.S. takeover. And the commercial interests were saying this was a commercial takeover. Yeah, everybody thought this was a dreadful idea because, of course, they thought they were the ones who should be in charge. And the great thing about ICANN was that it was designed not to do too much.
Right.
And Postel was your ultimate non-commercial, techie kind of guy. But unfortunately, he died of complications after heart surgery in September of the year that ICANN was created, which was 1998.
Mm-hmm.
We had our first board meeting, I think, in November, and none of the other board members volunteered to be chairman, so I raised my hand. And
well, all of a sudden you're running the internet.
It was not a contested election.
And you're in charge of the top level domain name server.
Well, we were not in charge. We were the board. We were not running things. We were there to set policy, and we, of course, were supposed to represent the consensus of the internet community. And unfortunately, when John died, he was represented by his lawyer, Joe Sims, who's a great guy, but who is a commercial litigator. And he was, in fact, the perfect person to break the monopoly of network solutions, but he was kind of the wrong person to be the, if you like, the culture of an internet governance.
Too contentious.
But the first order of business was indeed to break the NSI monopoly, and they fought us bitterly because, of course, it was a monopoly and it was a very attractive one. It was like a lot of these monopolies. It was legitimately acquired, but then, in retrospect, perhaps people should have thought about it differently.
And ICANN's been operating now for 16 years?
Since 1998, yeah.
And the internet has grown by orders of magnitude since then?
Right, and it's become something used by techies and insiders, all of whom were, at least the culture was very well-meaning, and nobody thought anybody would do anything like spam or fraud or identity theft.
Everyone's going to be nice.
Yes, and of course that changed.
Yeah, left a lot of holes and a lot of opportunity for people to come and maybe plug those holes. Why don't you help us? When you type in www.amazon.com into my browser, exactly what happens and how do I end up at the right place?
Well, 9 times out of 10, you don't go anywhere near the root server or anything like that. You go to some localish little database run by your ISP that then says Amazon.com. Oh, yeah, the best one is 392-896-4987702 or something like that. And you go to probably an Amazon server that then looks you up somewhere in their database. And then you have to recognize your password and so forth and so on. But a lot of what goes on the internet is mirrored.
Behind the scenes and
here
mirrored.
Or there. And then, it's like you go back to the main place for difficult questions or big secure things or so forth. But it's very hierarchical and layered and decentralized.
And at the very top are the root servers.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say at the very bottom, in a sense.
Okay.
You usually don't need to dig that deep to get to where you're going. You just, you get sort of sent on to where you're going without checking at the very bottom.
Things are about to change. There's been a lot of press that there's about to be a globalization of ICANN in a form that people don't quite understand yet.
Right. So just nothing about the infrastructure is likely to change. What is possible to change are the rules by which it is governed, the rules about the words in a domain name, the rules about intellectual property, and of course what people are scared of is the rules about who can have a domain name and whether it can have things in it like FedExSucks.com, or whether it can have, references to sex, or whether it can have improper references to some government figure or holy person, or, all these kinds of things. And as Americans, we believe in freedom of speech, and we've pretty much helped to keep that intact in domain names.
The way this has been characterized, at least in my reading, is that there's a lot of fear in some quarters that the control of these policies is going to fall to the International Telecommunications Union, which is a United Nations agency, and then become subject to the political whims of the UN.
Precisely. Or to some other body that's kind of an ITU lookalike that is mostly controlled by governments. And that it's one thing to say you can't have this word in your domain name. It's also you're an organization that we don't like, so you don't have a legitimate right to have a domain name.
Yeah, we're going to turn you off in Turkey or in Iraq or in Egypt.
Yes, it's been known to happen.
And you're going to go dark. What's the process ahead? When does this globalization happen and who's in charge?
Well, it's not really clear. It's kind of like the U.S. saying, well, we want our daughter to be free. We're going to marry her off. Yeah, that's all very well to say, but you have to marry her off to someone in particular. And there's nobody really qualified to take on that role, unless it's the ITU, which I think is a non-starter. And so,
who's guiding this process in government, in our government?
Well, officially it's the Department of Commerce. Congress is now weighing in.
Okay. So it's up for grabs. We would like peace in the Middle East and have at it.
Yeah, in a sense, this is kind of trivial because the real threats to freedom of speech are police forces knocking on your door and people with guns and tax police coming and destroying your business. There are ways to get around this, as they did in Turkey. There are ways to create an alternative internet. I mean, in the future, people aren't going to be using domain names that much anyway. They're just going to be typing things into Google. But then you get the impact that you find only the things you already knew about because of your search history. So it would be really sad, but it's a short-term kind of thing in some sense. But it would be extremely disruptive.
It sounds like there's a lot of opportunity for mischief,
Yes.
but eventually, given the levels of redundancy, the interest, the internet will find a way to heal itself.
Yeah, I mean, good things and bad things always happen on the margin, and I think this would be really unfortunate because the people who know what they're trying to get to and the people who have technical skills and the people who are rich who can hire other people to do it for them, they'll do fine. But it's the ability of the internet to keep growing, to reach little guys everywhere. This is just one more huge burden and obstacle to that, which would be extremely unfortunate.
Well, let's see what Congress does about this once it stops worrying about the next election and starts legislating again.
That's what they always do, unfortunately.
I suppose. That's the business
I mean, in
model.
a sense, the problems in this world are ICANN's a reflection of them, not the cause of them.
Yeah. Esther, you're the closest thing I know to a Renaissance woman. You've been involved in so many things, in angel investing in the former Soviet Union, in space travel. I understand you're very interested in healthcare or wellness. That might be a better way to say it. You recently launched a project called Way to Wellville. Tell us about that.
Okay. So I did indeed, along with the CEO of Hiccup, which is the entity that launched it, Rick Brush, who deserves all the credit for doing all the work. When people say wellness, they think go to a nice spa and have somebody pummel your back. I'm looking at health as more the capacity to live effectively and not be incapacitated by disease or chronic illness or mental health or whatever. And so many people think, well, you know, if we fix the healthcare system and maybe if we give everybody a Fitbit so they can count their steps, it'll all be fine. But the reality is this country is facing an obesity crisis, a diabetes crisis.
Well, so much of our ill health is self-inflicted. You eat too much, you smoke too much, you don't wear your seatbelt, you practice unprotected sex. I mean, you go through that list and there's half the budget on healthcare.
And do you do any of those?
I always wear my seatbelt. I'm monogamous. I've got my weight where I want it. I remarried and I got myself in the gym, but I'm not giving up pasta.
And you don't smoke?
No.
Okay, well then you're one of the lucky ones who has self-discipline and also probably has some good grocery stores nearby and has a job that enables you to afford that. And a depressing number of people don't. Some of them don't have a job because they're sick. I'm not trying to solve the world's problems, but I do think that if a community got involved in health in a way that was fairly, how shall we say, active, but in a way that was not, you know, it's one thing for the federal government to come and tell you how to live. It's another for your community to decide together, we want to improve the lunches in the schools. We want to have bike paths. We want to do all these things that will actually make our community not just healthier, but also more prosperous. But of course, we don't think long term. We want to find 5 communities that would like to do that and would like a bit of help from outside, both investors who are going to come in and do some long-term investments in turn for reaping some of the cost reductions and gains, and others who are willing to donate just to see what would happen.
So this is a pilot program or a contest?
It's a contest. It was modeled on the X Prize. Long ago, there was going to be an X Prize.
So it's a community X Prize.
Yeah, and the goal is not really to go out and help 5 communities become healthy. I mean, that's the mechanism. The real thing is to create evidence and inspiration and show this is what happens if you do this, so that other communities will say, gee, we see this, would like to do it too.
Now, how big a community are you talking about here? Clearly, L.A. would be a bit big to try to get people nagging each other.
Small places. So if you look at most health interventions now, they're kind of like pouring a cup of coffee into a swimming pool. It just vanishes. You know, in this town, we had 500 people train for the marathon, and they all lost weight, and they got healthy, but nothing happened, and nothing that anybody could see changed. If you were a data scientist, you did some regression analysis, you could see perhaps a change. So what we're looking for is the equivalent of pouring pots of coffee into a bathtub where you can really see it change. So smaller communities, under 100,000 people, that are isolated. They're not a suburb of somewhere else, so that if you live in this community, you can't go have lunch somewhere else. So that whatever things we do, they really have an impact on the people who live there. And second, for cleaner data, so we actually know what people ate. And obviously, these communities have to want to do it. They have to agree.
Which means the mayor wants to do it, or there's
the mayor, the school system, the city council, the 5 big employers. If they don't all want to do it, it's not going to happen. And so we're not trying to persuade people to do this. We're trying to find people who want to do it and would like some help, they'd like some recognition, they'd like to be part of a contest, they'd like to get visibility for it. And, they'd like some of this excitement to help persuade everybody in the community that it's a good idea.
So the town economic and cultural leaders come to this organization, apply to be one of the 5, tell you what they're going to do to get the maximum inclusiveness, and you and your organization are going to select 5 candidates?
Right. And then we're going to help them find funding. We're going to introduce them to medical experts. We're going to work with them. So HICCUP stands for Health Initiative Coordinating Council. So we coordinate this. We're not running it, and we're not a nice white lady from New York telling these poor people how to behave. We're somebody who would love to do an experiment with them and learn from it and then help it get visibility. So we opened our call for applications on Thursday at www.hiccup.co.
And how are you promoting this?
By going on radio shows, by talking to all kinds of public health people, by speaking at conferences. We're very lucky to get some pro bono help from Ogilvy PR. I'm on the board of their parent company. I don't want to oversell who is supporting us but we're talking with wonderful outfits like the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and lots of academic people, the California Healthcare Foundation. And we are still very much in raising money mode, but I was lucky to have some Facebook shares that I could put into this thing to get it started.
How do you get people to stop stuffing their face, smoking, and get them outside to get some exercise?
Well, if I were some food company, I could ask, how do I get people to buy my stuff? Well, I put it near the checkout counter. I make it look sexy. I have ads. We're not going to go around necessarily saying, eat this, it's healthy. So every food company, if you talk to their PR people, they will tell you, look, we don't want to make Americans sick. We would love to sell healthy food. In fact, in our kitchens, we're working on trying to make healthy food taste good. And so what we're saying to them is, you'd love to sell this, but your competition and your shareholders won't let you, right? Well, we have 5 test markets, demilitarized zones, where you can sell your healthy food. You can try all kinds of marketing approaches. You can pilot new approaches. And the competition is going to be doing similar things. So please come to these Wellvilles and give it a whirl.
So you're creating an experimental climate.
Yes.
And how do you plan on measuring the before and after results?
Well, another thing we're doing is we're going to get 5 grad students from somewhere, and they will work with the community college or equivalent institution in each of these places to help create a data science curriculum. Again, the community needs to provide first a baseline, and one measure whether a community is ready to do this in the first place is whether they have any data about the health of their residents. Then we will monitor it, and we expect there will be subsidiary contests with some subset of each population doing things like Fitbits or quarterly blood tests or weigh-ins. Or what we're trying to do is not simply one intervention, but again, a big experiment with lots of different things going on. And of course, from a scientist's point of view, oh my God, how can we tell whether it was the running program or the eating program that made the difference? But from any normal person's point of view, the message is pretty clear, which is you need to do all of these things and you need to do them at scale. And then you have some hope of actually seeing a difference. When you come back 5 years later and the people are healthier, unemployment is lower because fewer people are sick, absenteeism is lower, high school graduation rates are higher. I mean, all these things, scientific studies have shown kids who eat better do better in school. But none of it happens at critical density, and that's what we're trying to make happen.
It seems like a massive cultural challenge.
It is. It is indeed.
And, swimming upstream against forces that have been at work for 30, 40, 50 years.
Yes.
What makes you at all optimistic that this will produce any interesting results?
So first of all, every once in a while someone says to me, you don't really need to do this. Obesity is going down. People are getting much more focused on healthy food. And it's true in some places, but it really needs a little push. And I think it really needs also some evidence that people can see rather than scientific studies that these kinds of things really make a difference. And yeah, it's extremely complicated, which is why no one's done it before. And it's risky. I can't guarantee you will it succeed, but it's the one thing I can think of right now that's worth doing that I can do. I'm not any longer interested in investing in, iPhone apps that help you find concerts on Friday night.
There's plenty of that. Do you think there's a relationship between people's unwillingness to take care of themselves and the lack of accountability in the fact that they can always turn around and get free health care if they want it?
Not really. I mean, it's part of it, but I don't think people say, I don't mind getting fat because I can get health care. It's the lure of the donut. No one wants to be unhealthy just because it's free.
How do you teach an adult self-control if they don't have it already?
I don't know, but we're going to learn. Not everybody in these places is going to change themselves. Mm. But if you can get 20% of the children dramatically healthier, that's a noticeable change. We're going to find out a lot. We're going to find out which subgroups can change and which can't, which messages work, which don't.
It's a giant science experiment.
Yeah. You put in a transit system and people 2 miles away, nothing happens. They keep driving their cars. People between 1.5 and half a mile away, they walk to the transit system and take transit and they end up healthier. The studies have shown that. People half a mile away, they don't walk enough to make a difference. But it's those kinds of things. It's not listening to lectures. Mm-hmm.
As you continue in your interesting career, and I hope we get to see many more projects from you in the future, what do you hope to leave behind with this one? What impact are you looking for?
That lots of people who've never heard of me or Rick or Wellville are automatically healthier the way right now a lot of people are automatically unhealthy without thinking about it.
Fascinating to get back in touch with you after all these years, Esther. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
That wraps up our show. We've been chatting with Internet maven Esther Dyson here on Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. Thanks for listening. See you next week.